Israel stops its policy of forced deportation. So what's next for the 40,000 Africans waiting for news about their applications for refugee status? South Africa's white farmers seek a role in land reform as the ruling African National Congress moves to change the country's constitution. And Somalia takes steps to boost its fledgling technology sector. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. In a major move, Israel has halted its policy of forced deportation of African asylum seekers, but it has not granted the vast majority of them refugee status, leaving more than 40,000 people in limbo. Linda Gradstein reports from Tel Aviv.
Michael Aforke from Eritrea remembers his first week in Israel. He had no money and slept in a Tel Aviv park. 8 years later, speaking fluent Hebrew and with 2 children born in Israel, this is still not home.
I'm not considered a resident, not considered anything. Like I'm in the air. I live from hand to mouth, not knowing what will happen tomorrow. My children and I have no status.
Israelis work with asylum seekers at the African Refugee Development Center in Tel Aviv and see how the uncertainty is creating stress in the community. Some refugees do not want their face on camera.
What is our status? Are we staying here? Are we going back? Where is the life it will take us? Because we need to know.
40,000 asylum seekers have special visas that allow them to work in Israel. The Israeli Supreme Court ruled the state must give their children free education, but they do not receive health care or any other benefits. The Workers' Hotline, a rights group, advises asylum seekers about a new Israeli law which requires their employers to deposit 20% of their salary in a special fund, returned only when they leave Israel.
They feel the burden of the deposit law. They're running out of air. There's no more saving. There's nothing.
Some asylum seekers complain their employers have deducted money from their salaries, but there's no record of that money being deposited anywhere.
I want my money back. It's my money that they took out of my salary every month. It's thousands of dollars and they stole it from me.
Thinking about what this means for her young son is too much to bear.
I am a refugee and I don't want him to go through what I did. I want him to have a country that he belongs to and where he can realize his dreams.
Lola would like to return one day to Eritrea, but she doesn't know when or if that will happen. Linda Gradstein for VOA News, Tel Aviv.
Well, the Angolan government has kicked out 300,000 Congolese migrants in a crackdown on illegal mining. Many now find themselves trapped without food, money and sanitation. Sam Holder of Reuters news agency reports.
Aid agencies are warning of a humanitarian crisis as more than 300,000 Congolese migrants have been forced out from Angola. Many are without food or shelter. The migrants were mostly working in Angolan mines and were expelled to the Democratic Republic of the Congo as part of a government crackdown on illegal diamond mining. The Angolan government has denied all wrongdoing, but witnesses say Congolese neighborhoods have been burnt down and migrants killed.
The UN Human Rights Office has received reports indicating that security forces in Angola used excessive force in their operations to deport the Congolese nationals. The team has verified information about 6 deaths, reportedly at the hands of security forces.
Most of the expelled miners have travelled to the volatile Kasai province, a hotbed of ethnic tensions and militia violence. Recent fighting there led to more than 1.5 million people fleeing their homes. Now at least 50,000 of the migrants are trapped in the border town of Kamako, which normally only has a population of 20,000. It's putting severe strain on an area already suffering from poverty, disease and hunger.
I left Angola with my 3 children, bringing just my clothes, nothing else.
We're really suffering here in Kamako. People are sleeping outside or in churches. Children are out in the rain.
Many of the migrants have no money left to travel any further, selling their sleeping mats to pay for a meal. Aid agencies say there's now a real risk of violence, epidemics and a lack of food.
Well, that was Sam Holt of Reuters news agency reporting there. Now, South Sudan on Friday released opposition leader Riek Machar's spokesman and a South African advisor from prison to reinforce a peace deal signed in September. James Gadet and William John Ainley, a South African citizen, had been found guilty of treason and espionage and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Gadet was arrested by Kenyan security forces in Nairobi and deported to South Sudan in November 2016. Now, according to the High Court in Juba, Ainley was a political advisor to Machar when he was arrested in Juba in August 2016. His arrest came just days after renewed fighting broke out between government forces and Machar's bodyguards. The September 12th peace agreement requires the parties to release all political detainees and prisoners of war. U.S. President Donald Trump says U.S. Troops have been dispatched to the border with Mexico to prevent a caravan of migrants from crossing into the United States. Speaking at the White House Thursday, the president said, "These are tough people. In many cases, you have young men, strong men." He said, "Anybody throwing rocks, we will consider that a firearm." Trump delivered his remarks before traveling to Missouri for another campaign rally on behalf of Republicans ahead of midterm elections Tuesday. VOA's Zlatitsa Hoke reports.
Thousands of migrants walked through Mexico toward the U.S. border on Thursday. The caravan was formed October 12th in crime and poverty-ridden Honduras. Some people dropped off and others joined the caravan along the way. This is the second such caravan formed this year, and Trump blames the Democrats.
Once they arrive, the Democrat Party's vision is to offer them free health care, free welfare, free education, and even the right to vote.
Trump said illegal immigration costs U.S. taxpayers billions of dollars a year.
My administration is finalizing a plan to end the rampant abuse of our asylum system. It's abused, to halt the dangerous influx and to establish control over America's sovereign borders.
Hours before the speech, Trump issued a controversial anti-immigrant video ad which portrays a Mexican citizen who has entered the United States illegally several times and has killed 2 law enforcement officers in California. Analysts say Trump hopes to foment fear of migrants to garner more support for Republicans in midterm elections.
Which is why we hear him repeatedly hammering down the fact that this caravan is coming and is imminent. During his speech, he called it an invasion several times. He thinks that bringing up fear about immigrants and fear of this caravan reflects or will help push people to the polls to vote for Republicans, framing the Republicans as the party that will protect us from this situation.
But analysts also say that Trump is right in saying that the U.S. asylum system creates undue incentive for people without true asylum claim to come to the United States.
Right now, when people apply for asylum at our southern border, they're given a cursory initial credible fear interview. If they pass that, then their case file is handed over to our immigration court system, which is backlogged for a very long time.
Trump said people who want to come and work in the United States are welcome, but they must come in legally. He urged migrants currently heading for the U.S. border to return home and apply for lawful entry. Zlatitsa Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
Well, for more on the deployment of U.S. troops to the U.S.-Mexico border, I'm joined live via Skype by VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb. Carla.
Hi, Vincent.
Yes, now give us the latest. We knew that initially 5,000 troops were being sent down there. What's the latest?
Well, I've just learned from 2 U.S. defense officials that that number has gone up again. What started with a 2,100 deployment of National Guard troops, then they added on an additional 5,200 active duty troops, and now we're looking at least 8,000 active duty troops either deploying right now or slated to deploy to the border. So that's a total of more than 2,000 active duty and National Guard troops. That's more than the United States has fighting terrorists in Iraq and Syria.
Wow, this kind of creates the impression of a major threat. There are whispers that some generals, including some former generals, actually are voicing concerns regarding this, and perhaps there could be a legal issue here. What are they saying?
That's right. There appears to be a disconnect between what the President of the United States is saying and what the deployment orders that U.S. military officials are telling reporters. So we have learned that this deployment is strictly for logistics and helping Border Patrol agents. They will be setting up fencing. They will be driving Border Patrol agents around, providing aerial support, setting up tents or temporary housing for those Border Patrol agents, whereas the president has said that the military will be setting up housing to detain migrants. That's not what we're hearing at the Pentagon. He also mentioned that if people were throwing rocks, the U.S. military could consider that a rifle. That's not what the Pentagon says are the rules of engagement. U.S. military officials say that troops cannot fire on unarmed people. So there's clearly a disconnect between what's going on. And we've heard some former generals speak out and say that the military must follow their rules of engagement. The military must follow their orders.
Now we know that the commander-in-chief is the president, but the rules of engagement, can some of the commanders disobey a directive from the president if they feel that it goes against the rules of engagement by the military?
I think everything is being sorted out on the fly here, as you can hear with the number of troops that are deploying, how that number is changing relatively rapidly. But one thing is clear, this is not being based on a direct order from the president. This troop deployment is being based off of a request from the Department of Homeland Security asking for help on the border. So the military is responding to specific capabilities that the Department of Homeland Security has identified that they lack at the border and they need. They will not be conducting any sort of law enforcement activities. The military is prohibited by law from doing that. So I think that the military is going to be sticking to those specific requests and not branching out.
You know, you really clarify things, Carla. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for your reporting. That's viewers Carla Babb reporting live via Skype from the Pentagon. Now, I want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook. So check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Still ahead on Africa 54. Can Somalia woo investors to its growing tech sector? But first, a look at Friday's headlines.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Red Cross says tens of thousands of Congolese citizens who were expelled from Angola are now stuck at the border crossing in Kamako.
I have no doubt that the ANC is going to win the next election.
In South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa admits the ruling ANC party had emerged from a very dark period under Jacob Zuma and would bounce back to win next year's election. The Tanzanian Regional Commissioner has announced the creation of a team dedicated to tracking down and detaining gay people. Finally, in Somalia, created more than 10 years ago by a trained dentist, the only free ambulance service in that country, called Amin Ambulance, is currently underfunded and may have to shut down. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.
White South African farmers are seeking a role in land reform as the ruling African National Congress moves to change the constitution to allow for the expropriation of white-owned land to rectify racial ownership disparities. Francis Maguire reports.
More than 10 years ago, Sabi Suke and 15 other investors achieved a dream, one that few black South Africans get to experience, owning farmland. 472 hectares was first bought by the state from a white farmer and then transferred to a trust made up of hopeful black farmers. The land is in South Africa's fertile maize belt, but today lies fallow. Suke and her fellow investors weren't able to develop the land due to a lack of funding and training.
This farm does not benefit us. The government's never helped us. As you can see with this farm, we were never trained and we know nothing about farming.
Land ownership is contentious in South Africa. Most of it is still in the hands of the country's white minority. Since the end of apartheid in 1994, the ruling African National Congress has pursued a willing seller, willing buyer model, buying land from white farmers and redistributing to the black community. White cattle farmer Nick Serfontein is on a panel chosen by President Ramaphosa to speed up redistribution without hurting the economy. He says change is needed as emerging black farmers want to get into the market, but often lack direction. He also helps black farmers access loans they need to develop land.
For an emerging farmer to start, he's going to require at least, I would say, in the order of about 1 million rand, average commercial farmer, to recapitalize that farm, to put in infrastructure and to buy stock.
Serfontein has warned against the government pursuing a policy of redistributing land without compensating farmers, while some observers have also questioned the focus on land reform, when there's a growing need for housing among the country's swelling urban populations.
Well, that's Francis Maguire of Reuters with that report. The South Africa Tomorrow Investor Conference is the leading offshore South African conference for institutional investors. It promotes the country as a desirable investment destination that is open for business. This time around, the conference is being held in New York. To tell us more about the gathering is Trevor Manuel, South Africa's former Minister of Finance from 1996 to 2009. He is now President Cyril Ramaphosa's envoy on investment. He joins me live from New York. Mr. Manuel, welcome to Africa 54.
Good day, Vincent, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
You're welcome. And you see, you and three others have been tasked to secure a target of about $100 billion in investments over the next 5 years. To what extent will the land expropriation issue be a factor or even a challenge to you personally?
Well, land is always an issue, and I think that the Francis Heard clip earlier reflects on the fact that since democracy we haven't adequately dealt with the land issue. President Ramaphosa has appointed a panel of 10 experts in land, academics, practitioners. Nick Serfontein, the farmer, was in that clip as one of the members, and Nick is also a representative of organized agriculture. There are also representatives of the emerging farmer community, and I'm pretty convinced that out of a panel like that you will have a very rational set of arguments about how to deal with the much vexed issue of land reform going forward. And my own contact with a number of prospective investors reflects the fact that it's very reassuring to have a president who appoints experts in the field, who understand the issue better, to advise on this matter. And I'm sure that by the time of our elections in May next year, we will have a lot more certainty about how to deal with this matter going forward.
Do you get concerned about some of those on both sides who tend to employ scare tactics, including innuendos of possible genocide and suggestion that they may have to go to exile in Australia and other places?
Well, there's been a rather unfortunate group called AfriForum who hark back to the darkest days of apartheid, of minority rule. They've been here in the US, they've lobbied a number of non-governmental organizations. They've apparently been around the capital as well, trying to put out a story of genocide. The story of genocide is not supported by any empirical evidence, and part of the evidence has been adduced by Agri-SA, which is the organization of organized agriculture, as it were, and you know, there's no genocide. There's no reality of genocide, in spite of what the propagandists in AfriForum have had to say about this.
Now, here's other reality in South Africa. The rand, South Africa's currency, is currently trading at a very weakened position. We're talking about 14 rand to $1 at the moment. How do you sell South Africa to foreign investors in this kind of environment where the economy looks like it is dragging, it is wobbling?
Well, you know, there are two parts to this. One part is that we'd like to get a lot more growth in the economy. We're talking of about 1.3% in the next 12 months. That growth is too low. And The big group of ambassadors we have for foreign investors are actually those already invested in South Africa. From my contacts in the US, in various parts of Europe, in China, those who are already invested can tell good stories about what their returns have been in general. The key issue is not what the exchange rate of the rand is traded on any day. A bigger question is volatility. And this is why the issues of macroeconomic stability, and we've had both the Governor of the Reserve Bank and the Minister of Finance at the South Africa Tomorrow conference here in New York. I think that if we get the policy issues right, we've been there before, fortunately. If we get it right, I think there's a message of predictability and certainty, which is more important than any particular exchange rate or any fixed exchange rate for that matter.
Very quickly, Honorable Manuel, China, big on the continent. What is your engagement like with China? What do you need from China? What does China want from Africa, from South Africa specifically?
Well, the interesting thing is that about 6 weeks ago, there was a very large forum in Beijing hosted by President Xi Jinping, which is called the Forum for Africa-China Cooperation, FOCAC. And at that conference, President Xi Jinping made a commitment of $60 billion of new investment onto the African continent. It was very well received, and this can be broken down. There's no obvious claim against it. I think countries would have to contest to have access to that kind of resource. Subsequent to that, President Trump made a commitment of about $60 billion to support African development as well. And I think that he may seek to bring together existing programs, including AGOA, USAID, and try and manage the distribution of that. So it is being matched at the moment as we go ahead.
We do appreciate your thoughts. Thank you very much, Mr. Manuel. Well, that's Trevor Manuel, South Africa's former finance minister and now President Cyril Ramaphosa's envoy on investment. Now, Somalia hosted its first technology and innovation conference in October with much talk about the industry's potential. Somalia's security threats and poor governance make attracting investment a huge challenge. But as Mohammed Sheikh Noor reports from Mogadishu, the company has set up the capital city's first co-working space to help foster Somalia's digital economy.
One of Africa's least secure and worst governed countries, Somalia is unlikely place for technology and innovation. iRise Hub co-founder Abdhakin Ainte wants to change that by connecting investors with Somalia's young innovators.
We use technology as a means to get an employment opportunity for the Somali youth, who make up the 75% of the total population of the country. And all of them, they are surprisingly below the 30 years old.
iRise helped organize Somalia's first ever technology summit. The government wants to change the view that Somalia is not safe for visitors or investors.
Part of the commitment of the Office of Prime Minister and the Prime Minister himself to this city and Somalia as a general is to create an enabling environment that can attract investment from global investors and make Somalia the final destination for tourists and investors.
For a country in conflict, Somalia's digital market potential is striking, as mobile money has nearly replaced cash. The World Bank says Somalia has one of the most active mobile money markets in the world, with nearly $3 billion in transactions per month.
Using mobile money transfer has alleviated the burden of carrying huge cash in hand, and that has made our life much easier. You can simply buy something while using your phone wherever you are, in the shops and stores.
But the threat of terrorism and Somalia's poor infrastructure make attracting capital and supporting innovation a challenge.
The price of the internet and the price of electricity is like skyrocketing high. The other one is insecurity, which makes the whole process of doing business very difficult in Somalia.
Nonetheless, some remain optimistic about Somalia's technology potential. But innovation will remain a challenge as long as government resources are stretched and struggling just to provide the basics of security and services. Mohamed Sheikh Noor for VOA News, Mogadishu.
Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. The Great Migration of 2015 saw more than 2 million people make the arduous and perilous journey from the Middle East to Europe. Many arrived on European shores in rubber dinghies that were abandoned once the passengers were safely on land. Now, Vera Gunta and Nora Azouau have turned those dinghies into a sought-after fashion accessory using the €10,000 winnings from the Dolce Integration Prize. They're hiring asylum seekers and refugees to cut up the dinghies into bags and backpacks as a way of highlighting the talents and skills many brought with them to Germany. Now, according to European Union figures, Germany saw almost 1 million asylum applications in 2016 and 2017. And that's what is trending today. Well, we end our show today with a Sierra Leonean artist, Jane Peters. Her song, Masake, is done in 6 different languages as she tells the story of the strong kings and beautiful queens of Africa. From the entire Africa 54 team in Washington, have a great weekend.
I love you. Nothing can stop me from loving you, baby boy. Now you, I've been there to take care of. Now you, I've been there moko. But right now, I don't get heart stressed even a single baby. Akusana minalo alo masamoso. Nakanu na maleka. Nyana mo idumanyala. Nakanu masamuso sarang. Akusana minala alo masake. Nakanu na maleka. Nyana mo idumanyala. Africa musole. Salomu sole, Diana moi maniera. Baby atetina, I see don't buy me seven so Asabi touch you like me guitar, ooh baby oh. Oh, yeah, yeah. Now you, I've been there to take care of. Now you, I've been there moko. But right now, I don't get heart stressed even a single baby. Akusana minalo alo masamoso. Nakanu na maleka. Diana mo idumanyala. Nakanu masamuso sarang. Akusana minala alo masake. Nakanu na maleka.
Welcome to English in a Minute. A corner is basically an angle where 2 sides meet.
Boxed in a corner.
Let's find out why these two are talking about corners.
What's wrong? You look worried.
My friend Nico quit his job, had a baby, and bought a new house, all at the same time.
How's that going?
Not good. He's out.